Hello and welcome. Let's hope this is working. All right. The assignment I want to talk about today is M1T2. And so what I want to do is just spend a little bit of time on vectors. I'll create the project in Replit so we can get a little typing going and do my initial header. Now, what's a vector? So if you've worked with other languages, you have the idea of collections, which are just a data type that holds multiple pieces of data, which is a pretty neat thing to be able to do. All right, so let's do our header. 1, 2. All right. So the idea behind a vector is that you can resize it. Now there's always been various ways to have collections of data. Going back to C, which came before C++ and kind of early C++, you would allocate sections of memory yourself and then figure out, okay, how much memory do I need for each of these items? Now, as you can imagine, that could get pretty confusing. And certainly if you have something that's the wrong size, you're going to have a real issue. So let's try this and say vector example. Okay. As always, just trying to get warmed up here, make sure my code's actually working. Fantastic. Okay. So if we look at how vectors are used, what we notice is you see these angle brackets. Now, this is what's called a templatized type. A template just being that vectors exist for any data type. Whatever the data type is, you can make a vector of it. And so it will figure out, how much memory is needed for each item and all those things on its own. So let's look at sort of the simplest program that we could write here. And we'll just do a vector with a couple of numbers in it. Okay, so that sounds good. So we'll say create a vector. Now, one of the things we're going to see is that you can resize them, but in the early ones, we're just going to make a static sized vector and we're going to just manipulate it. And then we'll worry about how to add things later. Okay, so we've created now a vector that holds 3 ints. Okay, and we'll just put some numbers in here at 1 equals 70 and another 95. Okay, cool. Okay, so what you see is referencing an item in the vector is just by using the vector name dot at and then the index. Now the index is always a 0 index. The first item is 0. Computers start counting as 0, right? So here we go. Great. So the first item is there. So now, saying item 0 might be kind of weird, right? So if you wanted to say, for example, let's say int human readable index, not a great name, right? Um, right. So that looks pretty dumb, but let's try this. -1. So to try that again, I see, after we give it a moment, cool. Item 1 is 42. So now I need to add a space there before and after, make it look nice. I don't like that name, human readable index. It's kind of long, but that's okay. Let's try it with a different number just to confirm that this works the same way. And here we go. All right, cool. Vector 2 is 7. Great. So what if I were to add a loop here? I'll say for, let's see, so I'll say index equals 0. Human readable is just index plus 1. Sorry, so rather than using this, rather than having a number that is easily readable for us, we'll just use a 0 count. And we'll say int index equals 0. Okay, cool. So let's say for index equals 0, index is less than 3, because that'll be 0, 1, and 2. Index plus plus. And now I'm going to put this code in here. So this will allow us to iterate through all of these items in the vector. I don't need, this line anymore. I don't need to declare index twice. So let's try this. For int, I could just do int index like this, right? Okay, great. So to recap, I've created a vector with 3 items in it. I've put 3 items in it, and now I'm just going to loop through to print them out. Let's just confirm that works. Well, we're certainly going to need a new line there to make it look readable. Okay, let's see what I did wrong here. Ah, yes, an extra semicolon. Great. So it's fairly simple. We create the vector. You see you get quite a bit of information here if you mouse over it and REPL it. And then you just use this to set these values. So it's kind of similar if you're familiar with Python to a Python list. But what you're going to find as we go forward, we're going to do a couple of different examples. Now, I'm not going to type this one in. You're fine to just use my example here. You'll notice this is basically the same thing as 521. It uses old people dying, which is a bit depressing. So I just use some random numbers. But you see here the same issue of, well, I got to check for the index between 1 and 5, which actually means it's between 0 and 4. So that's one of the things you're going to get into with an index. So with anything that has you pick an index in C++, it's going to start with 0. The smallest number is 0, and that indicates the first item. So I'm repeating myself at this point, so I think we'll call it here. What I wanted to point out is simply that you're going to be using vectors to do some of these challenge exercises, and then I'm going to have you do a program like this for the homework, which is due in a few weeks, which just has you use this more. So most of what you pick up in the first half of chapter 5 is going to be relevant. The biggest reason I want you to look at vectors and arrays, well, there's 2 of them. One is to understand different data types, data structures. Just a plain old list of values is sort of the simplest structure that isn't just one variable. And we'll look at more complicated ones. And the other reason is because I want to spend a lot of time going forward on functions. And in the book, they have a lot of examples of functions using vectors. So if we skip vectors, a lot of the future reading is not going to make a lot of sense. Okay, I'll leave it there, and thank you very much.